Please welcome Doug Lynam.
Good morning. Thank you for the privilege of speaking to you today. Now, it's often said that all world religions are paths up the mountaintop to the divine. But if each faith tradition is a path up the mountain, and the divine is at the top, what is the mountain made of? What is the common ground all world religions share? What is the dirt beneath our feet as we slog through our daily grind? Now, it's a question that has always bothered me since I was a kid. Now, perhaps that's why I jumped around to so many religions, looking for a solid path up the mountain. I've been an enthusiastic evangelical Christian, a very mediocre Buddhist, an atheist, an agnostic, and briefly a member of a cult with a Zoroastrian guru. I finally decided in my 20s that if I was ever going to find God, joining a monastery seemed the easiest route. So I became a Benedictine monk for 20 years. Unfortunately, there are no easy routes. But what do all the different paths up the mountain have in common? Our different faith traditions don't share the same theology, rites, or rituals, which has spawned countless wars and unspeakable massacres in the name of God. The problem is that to form a religion, to have an us, you have to have a them. To have an in-group, you have to have an out-group that you exclude. Now, that tribal urge to create community, which is good, too often separates us from each other and the natural world, producing endless religious conflict combined with mounting ecological disasters. If every religion is based on some form of exclusion, how could they all meet at a metaphorical mountaintop? Now, it was while on a monastic retreat at an ashram in India that I discovered a clue to this mystery. There I met Hindu, Buddhist, Jain, Taoist, and Christian monks who all quickly built lasting and meaningful friendships. Here finally was a chance to discuss the question of common ground with people of goodwill from many faiths, all of whom had either reached the mountaintop or at least had a high-level view. I was still trying to tie my boots and get out of base camp. Now, what was clear in those conversations is that we all share the same dilemma. We are all trying to figure out how to live our lives in the face of our inevitable expiration date. We are all mortal, and few of us are happy about that. As someone getting a little closer to their expiration date and who is starting to smell a bit ripe, I'm definitely not happy about it either. Or think of it like this. You can believe anything you want and have faith in any set of dogmas. But for a religion to have a mass market appeal and speak to the inner longings and struggles of people around the world, a religion must, no matter how badly, address our innermost problem. Otherwise, people won't follow it. So, what insights has every major religion discovered that helps us find meaning in the face of death? What they have in common is the same wisdom practices that help us make progress up the proverbial mountaintop to the divine. After all, mountain climbing is still mountain climbing, no matter which face of the mountain you try to scale. All religions practice the same three techniques for finding meaning in the face of our mortality, even though our theological maps cover different terrain and have different starting points. The three wisdom practices are contemplation, compassion, and action. Every faith tradition has a strong contemplative practice rooted in prayer and meditation. as well as an understanding that suffering is the human condition, which demands compassion, and also a call to action to alleviate that suffering. Contemplation is our ability to think through and meditate on complex problems while also connecting us to our deepest, truest selves. The more complexity and paradox we are able to integrate, the closer we come to the truth about ourselves and the world around us. Contemplative practices are like the trail markers, maps, and cairns left behind by previous climbers that help us orient ourselves, strategize, and navigate our way up the mountain to the divine. Contemplation shows us the truth about where we are and where we need to go, especially when the way is hard to see. Contemplation at its best allows us to see the truth, that the divine is everywhere, in everyone, and in everything. We might use different sounds with our ape faces to name that divine presence, such as Allah or Gaia or Christ, but it manifests universally. In Buddhism, this is called Buddha nature, or the oneness of all things. In Hinduism, it is called Brahman. In Islam, Tawheed. And if I'm leaving any religions out, it's only because of time, or they weren't on page 1 of my Google search. In the mystical realization of the unity of all things comes the understanding that there is no us, just as there is no them. There is only one eternal whole made in love. And once you experience that mystical truth, while you will always need a village, you no longer need a tribe. The contemplative mystical tradition shows us that our lives aren't winding down to an expiration date. Instead, we are all winding up to something indescribably magnificent. The second wisdom practice we share is the art of compassion. It's what I struggled with the most during my 20 years in the monastery. I had a very hard time learning to love my neighbor as myself because I did not like myself, so I wasn't very kind to my neighbor. My breakthrough in love and compassion did not occur in a church or in prayer or in meditation. Like most revelations, it happened when I hit rock bottom. It happened when I was immobilized on a gurney in St. Vincent's Hospital, in agony from a back injury that the heaviest pain medications only dented. For 2 weeks, I couldn't move, eat, or hardly sleep, and the pain broke me completely. I had to face my pain. I had to face my brokenness, both physical and psychological. But the paradox, as all the saints, mystics, and poets will tell you, the way down is the way up. As Richard Rohr put it, we grow spiritually much more by doing it wrong than by doing it right. If I didn't learn to love all of it, all my suffering, all the suffering of the world, and every poor decision I made that put me in that hospital bed, I would need to hasten my expiration date. Now, that forced me to love my brokenness and love everyone else and theirs. It is why the first of the 3 jewels in Taoism is compassion, or pity for a suffering world. Compassion literally means to suffer with. Pain is not an exception to the rule. It is the rule. Which is why the first noble truth of Buddhism is that life is suffering. It's also why the most important symbol in Christianity is the cross. It's why Christ commands us to pick up our cross and follow him. We follow Christ to Golgotha so that we can find our own transfiguration. At their best, all our faith traditions say the same thing about the practice of compassion. Be kind to everyone you meet, because everyone is having a really hard time. There was, however, an unintended side effect from this lesson in compassion that I learned through my injury. I was now capable of loving the world, but felt trapped in a contemplative monastery with limited means of serving the world. And compassion without action is just sentimental swill. The third practice all faiths share is a call to action. Loving everyone, loving everything isn't enough. Love is ineffectual unless it is harnessed and channeled into mindful action. In the Jewish tradition, this call is expressed as tikkun olam, which means to repair the world. Buddhists take refuge in the Sangha, or in service to the community. In Hinduism, it is karma. In Islam, it is the much misunderstood concept of jihad, or struggling to build a better world. Action is how we put one foot in front of the other to make step by step, day by day, progress up to the divine. This universal call to action, a desire to help create a better world, is what pulled me out of the monastery. It is why I became an investment advisor, committed to building a sustainable economy and alleviating poverty. These three critical developmental categories, contemplation, compassion, and action, are both the mountain and the dirt beneath our feet. They are also the way up. So where do these practices take us? What might we see at the mountaintop? What the saints, sages, and shamans have been telling us through the ages is that the mountaintop, as best I can understand it, is to realize that the universal manifestation of the divine in you and me has universal responsibility for the universal suffering of the world. Let me repeat that. The universal manifestation of the divine in you and me has universal responsibility for the universal suffering of the world. This is the heart of all our great spiritual traditions. It is the Bodhisattva Vow, and it is Christ on the cross. Here, perhaps, is a framework that might allow us to work together across religions to solve our most pressing global problems, like climate change. The divine spark in each of us is responsible to heal the suffering of the world, not create more of it. This also provides a template for understanding where religions become toxic. It's when they stop at the personal or tribal level and don't reach up to the universal level. When religion is about ego glorification or group power, it quickly turns destructive. When we can unite in our universal responsibility to protect creation and repair our fractured world, then our lives become what is called in the Jewish tradition mitzvahs, or living blessings. My only problem with the mountaintop metaphor is that, like all metaphors, it breaks down if you push it too far. There is never an end to the spiritual adventure, because the divine is infinite and we are finite. This means that there is no enlightenment. There are only enlightenments. And there are no magic prayers or magic spells we can incant to skip the hard work of eliminating our egos and letting the glory of the divine shine through us. In the end, there may not be a mountaintop, but only the mountain. And with that wisdom, I just saved you 20 years of living in a monastery. Thank you.